Now on the APEC VIP hotline, cutting-edge training for the serious athlete, apecgo.com. Joining us now from the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, author of the Big Mac blog, and also a contributor to DFWOT, the e-magazine for the iTablet, or the iPad, or whatever it is. It's Mac Engel. How you doing, sir?
Good, Bryan. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you very much for coming on. We'll get to the Cowboys and the Bears in just a minute. First of all, I heard the line today. I think Rick Riley said it, that Chicago's used to collapses. They, after all, they're the home of the Cubs. That collapse yesterday the United States had in the Ryder Cup was unbearable.
I turned it off. I didn't know it. I didn't even know it had happened until when the U.S. entered, when the singles play started. The lead looked so insurmountable that I just turned it off and went about the rest of my day. And I took my daughter to the park around 5 or 5:15 or 4:45, whatever it was, and then I'm screwing around on Twitter and I read that they gagged it. And the first time I read it, I thought that was a joke. And then the more Twitter feeds kept coming in that they had really lost it, and I thought, oh my God. They lost this at home.
At home.
Yeah, and I thought, if for as much talk, and I know going into the tournament, the U.S. was not necessarily expected to win. So if in 5 weeks someone says, yeah, the Ryder Cup remains with Europe, you say, okay, well, that makes sense. The Europeans were better. They had the better player in Rory, and they had more depth. And you would say that makes sense. But given the way the U.S. had the lead,
mm-hmm.
and then the way it looked like it was sort of stacked, even at the back with Tiger going, and then you would say, no, they blew it.
Well,
and it wasn't just, I still can't believe, it wasn't that they blew it, it was how they blew it.
They went into the Sunday singles with a 4-point lead, and Rick Riley today said it's like leading by 4 touchdowns with a quarter to play in a ball game. And
yeah, and you know what can happen? I mean, if we're going to stick with the football analogy, you know that can happen. You've seen games before where, teams come, they pull it off every now and then. It'll happen. But the fact this is such an infrequent tournament, the fact that the U.S. still has all these giant names, Phil and Tiger, obviously the most, Davis Love, and they would blow that, and it's still, you're like, how did that happen? So I'm still amazed that they managed to blow that lead. That was really quite impressive. And then the Rangers, a few hours later, appear to be doing their level best to get rid of that playoff spot. But alas, they the better team won, and they did it. But Bryan, I'm just absolutely shocked that the U.S. golf team managed to go out and screw that up the way they did in such impressive style on Sunday.
What is it about our teams in golf and tennis now? What's happening? Why? You know what I mean?
Good question. No, I've asked that question before, and I think it just comes down to, I don't think it's necessarily we've gotten any worse. I don't think the United States has gotten any worse. I just think those other countries have gotten better. They've just improved, and it's not as if any of them are really that bad. But I think more of those countries are spending money on it. I think the way they're teaching it and the way they're raising it is different than we do it. They have a lot of dedicated academies now to athletics that use that also teach, whereas we still very much can remain to the conventional school structure of school and then
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's some of it, and I think a lot of it too has to do with, and I don't know if this necessarily pertains to golf, but I certainly have seen it with football and other sports. Coaching and fundamentals continue to be lacking as we progress in sports and society. If you're the athlete, if you've got the athletic skills, you are rushed through the system to get you out as fast as possible. And if you've got the fundamentals, that's great, but that is what I have seen as the biggest change, and I think it's one of the biggest reasons why we've seen so many Europeans come over to the United States, and not even Europeans, but now South Americans as well, and have success, because they have fundamentals down in a way that makes up for any lack of athleticism. It evens the field.
It does.
And now we're seeing guys who are all over the place coming over and have such good fundamentals that they can play and they can thrive and they can excel.
Well, it was pretty impressive performance yesterday by them, and a very unimpressive performance by the American golfers. You mentioned the Rangers. How do you feel about this team now?
I think it's funny you should say it. I remember when they went into the playoffs a year ago, and I thought, man, I'm just not feeling it because they didn't have a hammer. But they had I thought they had three guys at their rotation who were very good number 2 or number 3 starters.
Mm-hmm.
The way I feel about the team now is that the whole difference has to be Yu Darvish. If Yu Darvish can go out there and account for 2 wins in every series, then I think they can win the World Series. But I got to tell you, they just don't seem to be rolling in with a lot of momentum. And I think getting there 3 straight years is really impressive. Getting to the World Series 3 consecutive years doesn't happen very much. It hasn't happened since the Yankees did it at the turn of the century. So I think what they're dealing with is it's going to be really hard. I think it's doable, and I don't necessarily look at how they've played these last couple of weeks as an accurate indicator of how they're going to play in the coming weeks. But it's not as if I would sit there and say, yeah, they're going to take care of the Yankees. It's not going to be a problem. They're way better than the Tigers. They're way better than the A's. They're going to knock out the Orioles. It's none of that. I think they're better than those teams, and I think they should beat those teams, but I just wouldn't be surprised if they lost to any of them.
Well, the thing that bothers me about the team is that, for instance, they crushed the AL West last year, and this year I think they've got a losing record right now against AL West opponents.
I mean, I wouldn't surprise me. The AL West is really good. I mean, look, they're going to have 3 teams. I think the Angels can still get to 90. That's really impressive. I mean, it's not like those are 3 really, really good teams. And if you look at and they all play each other, 1,000 times. And unlike the AL Central, which is still relatively weak, obviously the Indians, not the Indians, the Twins, and the Royals were all sub 500, which allowed the Tigers and White Sox to have pretty good years, even though they don't look as impressive. And I'm not necessarily surprised the Rangers came away with that. Came out of the AL West with a 500 or low or below record, but it doesn't exactly instill a whole lot of confidence that they're going to get this thing turned around in short order and take care of whoever it is that they'll have to play in the playoffs.
All right, I have to ask you, I'm hitting everything before I get to the last thing here with the Cowboys, but that Baylor-West Virginia game, do you like ball games like that where a team, 2 teams just put up pinball-like numbers? It's a video game.
I loved watching it, and I kept wanting to turn it off. I was like, well, because at one point in the second half, West Virginia got up by, 6-35 or something like that. I can't remember. I loved watching it, but I also know in my heart that it's not going to win big. And you said it to me in a message. It is the death of defense in the Big 12, and it appears to me right now there's about 2 teams in the Big 12 that are committed, well, maybe even 3, playing defense, and that's TCU, Kansas State, and believe it or not, Texas Tech. Texas Tech that's a pretty impressive thing what they did, considering the kind of season they're coming off of, and they went up to Ames, and they won that game. And they've got a huge game this weekend in Lubbock playing Oklahoma.
Yep.
But I like watching the game. I think it's a heck of a lot of fun. I just think it's not going to win. It's not going to win you the biggest games. It's going to win you games, a lot of games, but it's not going to win you the biggest games.
Yeah, and it kind of, to me, it makes the numbers that Geno Smith put up the other night, they look hollow to me because of the defense he faced.
I agree with you completely. I mean, they're amazing numbers, and they're not that too dissimilar to what RG3 was doing last year when he was throwing more touchdown passes than incompletions in a game. I mean, that's what Geno Smith did Saturday. He had 6 incompletions and 8 touchdowns. And you're right. It's kind of like when I mean, this isn't a perfect analogy, but I can't think of a different one. It's kind of like hitting all those home runs in the steroid era.
Yeah.
It used to be 50 home runs was a really, really big deal. And in the steroid era, you and I went out and hit 50 home runs. So when you see Geno Smith, and it is in college football these days, throwing for 300 yards, that's great. But now you got to get up to 375 or 400 to really impress you. So I think while what Geno Smith did was impressive, you have to put it in its proper context and say the other guy threw for 500 yards, threw for 5 touchdowns, and got his butt kicked.
I mean, yeah, you score 63 points in a game, you ought to win.
those numbers are ridiculous. And the thing that blew me away, and when I looked it up, and I don't know if you saw this, I put this up Saturday.
Mm-hmm.
Art Briles, Art Briles is a great coach.
He is.
This is noted. It's really what he did at Stephenville, what he did at Houston, what he's doing at Baylor is really, really impressive. And if you look at the numbers that his teams have put up since he arrived in 2008, everything has gone up. The win totals have gone up. The yards per game has gone up. The points per game have gone up. And so have the defensive numbers. Everything has been sort of going up parallel. I mean, and so you wonder, do you have to make it more of a priority in terms of who you're recruiting? Because I'll tell you, one of the things that I saw at TCU for the longest time was when Gary Patterson was here, they had those great defenses and very average offenses.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I saw was he was taking the best recruits and always putting them on defense.
Yep.
Always. Now there is some genuine shared wealth. They have very good athletes on defense and offense now. And I wonder, in terms of Baylor's evolution, if at some point he's got to just he has to get better recruits on defense. I'm not going to put this all on Phil Bennett's feet.
No. Phil Bennett's been a good coach for many, many years. He didn't forget how to coach defense.
No, I just don't think he has. I don't think he has players.
No, obviously he couldn't have.
No, and not only that. If you look at who's come out of Baylor in recent years in the draft, I don't know if they've had any defensive players. They've had linemen, they've had receivers, they've had a quarterback. I don't know if they've had any defensive players selected.
No.
No, I may be wrong about that, but I don't know if they've had any of them picked. The only thing that was perplexing to me when I watched that West Virginia Baylor game was, especially on the 3rd and 7 with about 2 minutes to go, is that he only rushed 3. And I kept thinking, I was like, this has gotten you crushed all day. And you're going to rush 3, yeah. and I understood it. I understand the logic behind it, but it wasn't working. And that's the part to me that I look at and say they must have absolutely nothing to work with, or he wasn't going to make that change. And I do wonder when I watch that team, especially as they get deeper into the Big 12, is how long can they keep doing this?
I don't know, but man, it was tough to watch from a defensive standpoint the other day. All right, Cowboys-Bears tonight. What do you think is going to happen other than Tony Romo's going to get the hell beat out of him again?
I could see both quarterbacks getting their brains kicked in pretty good.
I'm looking forward to that as far as Cutler's concerned.
I think the one guy, I think you can hit Romo and he'll get back up and he'll still play pretty well. I'm not as sure about Cutler. Cutler moves okay. He's not as athletic as Romo is, so I think it comes down to the defensive lines and who gets more pressure, or even front sevens. If the Bears get more pressure on Romo and they knock him into some stupid throws, which we've seen, we really saw it against Tampa, where he was getting hit so much he started feeling it. If the Bears are able to do that quicker than the Cowboys, I think the Bears are going to win. But if for some reason the Cowboys are able to block, which is going to be tough considering that Chicago front seven, then I think Cowboys will win. Cowboys are favored by, I think, 3.5. I think the line's gone up to 3.5. So I thought the Cowboys would win. I don't think it's going to be a very pretty game, but I'll give the Cowboys the edge because they're at home, and I think they're going to block a little bit better. But remember, Chicago came in here in 2010, which was the beginning of the downfall of Wade, and they rallied to win that game because the Cowboys simply just didn't make any adjustments against the Bears. I think this time it'd be a little bit different. I think we'll see a really close game. But I think the Cowboys front seven will harass Cutler into enough dumb throws that they'll win that game at the very end.
I hope you're right. I really hope
you don't have a lot of faith. I mean, this might be blind optimism. I don't know, but I know this. They can't. They're not going to go undefeated at home. But if you win your home games, you should be okay.
Yeah.
And I'm basically giving them the edge because it is at home.
Well, let's hope that some people show up awake and rowdy, totally unlike a usual Cowboys crowd. And,
and I'm hoping they at least arrive sober.
And leave drunk as hell.
Right. There you go.
All right. Hey, Mac, thanks very much, man. It's great talking to you today.
Likewise. Have a great week.
All right. Mac Engel from the Fort Worth Star-Telegram writes the Big Mac blog. Check out DFWOT as well. On Bryan Houston Sports Radio Live on 99.3 Talk FM.